Good evening. My name is Jeanette Pincus, and I'm the president of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. On behalf of our board, I want to welcome you to this special event with author Danny Fingeroth and his new book, Jack Ruby, The Many Faces of Oswald's Assassin. But first, may we take a moment to pause and pray for our people of Israel, who only want to live in peace, for those who've lost their lives so tragically, for those who've been held captive, and for their immediate safe return, and for those who've been called to protect us in Israel and here at home. Let us all say amen. Thank you. Now, I would like to thank Rochelle Weiss-Krang and her staff at the Aaron Family JCC for their help in coordinating this evening. We want to especially recognize and thank the Naxons, whose Naxon Family Project Fund enabled us to make tonight's program possible. We are happy you are here to join the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, the Margot Rosenberg Pulitzer Jewish Book Fest, and the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza, and having this wonderful author, Danny Fingeroth, be with us. For many of us growing up in Dallas, we remember what it was like to live this unforgettable piece of American history, when all eyes across the country fell upon our community when our president was assassinated and events of November 1963 unfolded. I would like to have Jessica Adams, our archivist and volunteer director, to introduce our speaker and moderator.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As Jeanette mentioned, I'm Jessica Adams, the archivist and volunteer director here. And you'll hear a little bit about why I am so excited to get to welcome you all here and introduce Stephen and Danny. So welcome to this installment of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society Lecture Series in partnership with the Margot Rosenberg Pulitzer Dallas Jewish Book Fest, presented by the Aaron Family JCC in Central Market and the Sixth Floor Museum. Before I go any further, if everyone would please silence your cell phones. It is the mission of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society to preserve and protect collections of written, visual, and audible materials that document the history of the Dallas Jewish community, to make these materials available to the public and researchers, and to keep the past as a living legacy for our community, which just so happens to align with the mission of the Book Fest, which is to join as a local community with the community at large to celebrate Jewish authors and books of Jewish interest. This annual literary program allows thousands of readers to connect with the best-selling authors and each other for book talks, panel discussions, and other engaging activities exploring relevant topics. The slate of Book Fest events reflects a diverse audience featuring a range of themes. Be sure to grab a bookmark, which will give you names, titles, and dates for upcoming author events. We want to express gratitude to DJHS members, Book Fest sponsors, Sixth Floor Museum members as well. We could not produce the individual or partnered events or events without support, and want to make particular mention of JCC Book Fest title sponsor Ann Rosenberg and the Margot Rosenberg Pulitzer Foundation. Tonight we are delighted to welcome author Danny Fingeroth, a renowned biographer and cultural historian specializing in history at the intersection of Jewish and American cultures. Fingeroth made his mark as a cultural observer with books including Superman on the Couch, What Superheroes Really Tell Us About Ourselves and Our Society, and Disguised as Clark Kent, Jews, Comics, and the Creation of the Superhero. His acclaimed 2019 biography of Stan Lee, A Marvelous Life, looks at this innovative Jewish American figure, the inventor of Marvel Comics, in the context of overall history. Now, with Jack Ruby, The Many Faces of Oswald's Assassin, Fingeroth, his expert ear to the ground for deeper meaning, takes us through Jack Ruby's bizarre life of extreme behavior leading up to and beyond that fateful weekend in Dallas in 1963, when Ruby emerged from a crowd and killed Lee Harvey Oswald. Danny emailed me in April asking for photos of Abe Weinstein and his club, Abe and Happy's, as well as photos of Rabbi Hillel Silverman. Unfortunately, I could not give him a photo of Hillel Silverman because we don't have one, but I could offer the Abe Weinstein photos, and as such, DJHS is credited in Danny's book. And because he asked for research help, I got to reach out to him and plan this whole thing. with Sixth Floor Museum and Stephen Fagin, who I'm so excited for your moderated talk, and with JCC Book Fest. And so if Danny hadn't reached out in January asking for photos, none of this would have happened. And it happens to be the 60th anniversary this week. So this is all very timely, and Danny's book comes out tomorrow officially, so you all also have early access.
12 hours early. 12 hours early.
12 hours early, but it's something, right? I have a couple more things to say. So fast forward a few months as we begin planning, and the organic connection to the Sixth Floor Museum and its curator is realized. Since joining Sixth Floor in 2000, Stephen Fagin has supervised the museum's ongoing oral history project, and today serves as institutional historian and content expert, contributing to collections, exhibits, education, and programming initiatives. The author of Assassination and Commemoration, as well as several articles about the Kennedy assassination, Fagin is an expert on that fateful weekend, and also assisted Danny in his research along the way for this book, making him the most appropriate moderator for this evening's program. So, if you haven't already, please silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Danny Fingeroth and Stephen Fagin.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. It's my great pleasure to do this. Danny and I believe, met years ago when he visited the Sixth Floor Museum to do research for, at that time, a graphic novel about Jack Ruby. We're going to talk about the evolution of that project, how it became the book that you now have tonight. But Danny, as I do with the oral histories at the Sixth Floor Museum, I want to start with you and your childhood awareness of John F. Kennedy and where you were on November 22nd, 1963.
Okay, well, I was 10 years old, so you can do the math and figure out how old I am, which I do too, think about it.
We can't hear you.
Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Can this be turned up?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, okay. I was 10 years old when the assassination happened, which gives you an idea of how old I am now. I'd rather not deal with that reality. I was living in New York. I was going to a yeshiva, and but so Kennedy was just around. I remember President Eisenhower, and then I remember there was an election. There was Nixon and Kennedy, and Kennedy was the general word was Kennedy was better looking, especially on television. But Nixon looked untrustworthy, and so that was why and how Kennedy beat him. My mother was a very straightforward liberal Democrat, so I'm sure she voted for Kennedy. My father was more all over the map. I don't recall any great discussion about him or what he stood for or represented. He was president. And then, of course, in the comic books I read, because as Jessica mentioned, I lifelong comic fan and worked at Marvel Comics for close to 20 years, writing and editing comics, many of which were about the conspiracies to take over the world. Kennedy would just be incidental. He would show up in an issue of the Fantastic Fours or an issue of Thor because they needed the president. And they would throw in the usual Kennedy cliches, we must let the rocking chair, the kind of comma of hair over his forehead, the mention of we must proceed with vigor, and then actually when the assassination happened, comic books sort of they did deal with it. There was that Superman story, but over at Marvel it was just that transition. Suddenly Lyndon Johnson was the president, and whenever you needed the president in the story, it would be Lyndon Johnson. My personal story, because I was going to a yeshiva, a school called Ramaz, in New York City. I did what, they let us out early because it was Friday afternoon, getting dark early, so they let us out for Shabbos. But since I lived 5 blocks from the school, I had a lot of free time, so me and another friend of mine went to buy used comic books on First Avenue and 88th Street. And as we were coming back, we were walking west on 86th Street, and a classmate came up. And this is, I told you, it's a ridiculous story because I remember this kid saying to me, "Did you hear Kenny was shot in Dallas?" And I thought, what was our friend Kenny doing in Dallas? And who would want to shoot him? And I've been telling myself that story and telling other people that story for decades. And then, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I realized I didn't know anybody named Kenny. Why did I have thought that? But that's my ridiculous. So I'm sorry it's not dramatic and that I wasn't in a bus and jumped off and went screaming. But but then it was, again, 10 years old. So maybe some of you who were similar age or more mature than I. But I just remember there was nothing. None of my TV shows were on TV. Everything was 24/7 about the assassination. And we weren't used to 24/7 news like we have it now. It's just enough with the news already. I know he got killed. It was terrible, but where's Bugs Bunny? It was just. And then of course we saw a replay of Ruby killing Oswald, and it was just surreal. But again, 10 years old, we go, maybe that's just how life is. Maybe, and certainly there were enough assassinations in the decade after that kind of, maybe that's how life is. But so I don't have the world's greatest story, but that's where I was.
And the assassination was not something that immediately became a subject of interest for you. It wasn't until about 10 years ago that you became interested in this?
Well, I don't know if it was a subject of interest to me because I live here. I live in America. And the president was killed. And I think once I started hearing all the different conspiracy theories, my head just, well, I shouldn't say my head exploded, that's a bad metaphor, but my brain overloaded. I just couldn't, I couldn't really make head, people I knew were reading books. I remember a colleague of mine was reading Contract on America, that book about, one of the many books about how the mob orchestrated the assassination. So I just kind of, I think like a lot of people, we dealt right, there was the assassination of Buckwheat on Saturday Night Live, which was, and then there was the whole spitting incident with Keith Hernandez on Seinfeld, which I think was a generational way of saying, we can't deal with it, it's too big. We're going to translate it into like absurd comedy because we can't deal with it. And then, about 12 years ago, I was looking around. I wanted to try my hand at doing a nonfiction graphic novel. In other words, a historical, biographical, long comic book. Mouse might be the one people are most familiar with, Art Spiegelman's Pulitzer Prize-winning book. And I looked at the calendar and I said, oh, it's coming up on the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. Wonder if anybody else is doing a graphic novel. Nobody else seemed to be. Turned out one guy did, but that, Okay, let me do some research. What's the Danny Fingeroth angle? Well, as you may have gathered from things I've been saying, I have a deep and varied Jewish background. My father was it's an oxymoron. My father was a famous cantor. In other words, nobody ever heard of him except 11 people in the casket. But he was, if you know the Neverly Hotel, my father was the cantor at the Neverly Hotel in High Holidays and Passover. So, I digressed about my father. How do I?
Okay, we're getting to how you became interested in Jack Ruby.
Yes, of course. So what I gravitated towards is Jack Ruby, this really bizarre, twisted, sometimes likable, violent, dare I say crazy Jewish guy who changed history. And the more I read about him, and then I even went. I own two copies. I own 2 copies of Hillel Silverman's autobiography because I lost. It is with Amazon, which you should buy my book here, not Amazon. But I lost a copy. I bought 2. I found out. Okay, Jack had this rabbi named Hillel Silverman. So I guess I accounted for like 10% of the sales of his memoir. Maybe you all have it. Called The Time of My Life. He talks about Ruby, and I went, boy, that's a guy. He must be dead, right? This is 50 years ago. He was in his 40s, but I mentioned him to somebody I knew, to my niece, the rabbi's father-in-law, and I said, so I'd love to get in touch, or even just with the heirs or whatever. Oh, I know Hillel. with Rabbi Silverman, who I interviewed on the phone, and everybody in the courtroom was writing a book, including Rabbi Silverman, and he said to me, I'm almost 90 years old. This was 10 years ago. I don't see that well. I'm not writing my book anymore. Would you like to see my notes from when I visited Jack in prison every other day for 4 months? I said, yeah, I wouldn't mind. And he sends, and I said, but just send me photocopies. I don't want the responsibility. But 90 years old, 2 days later, somehow he knows FedEx, but not photocopies. 2 days later, I get a FedEx package with his original notes with the rusty paper clips from 50 years ago. And you get this weird feeling, because you say, I said, anyway, is it a good idea for me to have original documents related to the Kennedy assassination in my house? So I scanned them and sent them back. But they were really amazing because he took very detailed notes, and he visited Jack really 3-4 times a week for 4 months. And so for the book, a lot of what I did was I took a lot of things in the trial transcript and news reports and other interviews that I did and that other people did and that are in the wonderful archives at the center. And I was able to weave a narrative that I think is a little different. Spoiler alert, I do not solve the mysteries of the Kennedy assassination. So if that's what you came for, I apologize, but I'm not that smart. So what I did want to do was tell the story of this strange guy who could have been my weird uncle or my weird cousin, except he took it obviously to an incredible extreme. So that from there on, all my friends and relatives are just sick to death of me chewing their ear off about Jack Ruby. So that was the beginning of my obsession with Ruby, much to the chagrin of everybody who knows me.
And how did the graphic novel project end up becoming the prose biography we have today?
I ended up partnering with an artist named Rick Geary, who some of you may know, and you probably know his visual style. He did a lot of stuff for National Lampoon. He does a lot of true murder graphic novels that he writes himself. But can I get a glass of water? No, thank you. I wrote, I went through 10 drafts of a 180-page comic book graphic novel, and Rick would still love to do it. Finding a publisher who would pay Rick to spend 2 years drawing this graphic novel just became, publishers would say to me, I'd buy that, but I can't publish it. And you go, well, if you buy it, don't you think other people, oh, thank you. So I put it on the back burner. I worked on a lot of other books and projects and teaching and so on. And then about 2 years ago, I said to my agent, now that I've written a biography and other books, do you think we could take this story of Jack Ruby, and I'd have to do a lot more work, a lot more research, and sell it as a prose biography? And he said, let's try, and here we are.
When Danny and I were talking about this program the other day, he mentioned, I think I'm going to put together a PowerPoint. And I thought, oh, he's going to make my job really easy. So I'm going to let Danny actually take over now for a few minutes because you prepared a pretty robust PowerPoint that really delves into the whole Jack Ruby story. You don't need me for this.
Oh.
So I'm going to go.
Well, I hope that you will chime in with comments.
I have never been known not to.
Yes. I'm going to go over to the podium.
And I'm going to sit down here so I can see what's on the screen. But yeah, we'll continue this conversation, and I'll be back, and we'll have some more questions towards the end.
And this is the world's largest remote control for the slides.
I think if they change mics, would
Yeah.
yeah.
Change the mic.
I don't know. It's terrible. It's so low.
Excuse me, could you change the microphone?
Oh, is it? Yeah.
There's another one right here.
Yeah.
Try this one. How does this sound?
Wow, let's start over. I really do want to thank, I've got to do some thanking. And forgive me whoever I leave out, but I want to thank the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, the JCC, the Sixth Floor Museum, Barry Schwitzer, Jessica Adams, Stephen Fagin, incarnating the Sixth Floor Museum. Rhoda Duchin and I had an adventure today we discovered some hitherto unknown to me ruby landmarks in Dallas. So anybody I've forgotten to thank, I apologize, but thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to come to Dallas to talk about Dallas stuff, like as if I know anything about Dallas stuff. So hopefully you'll tell me gently what I got wrong, and maybe let me know what I got right. Oh, look, that's the name of the book. That's the cover again. That is where Jack Ruby grew up. That's the Maxwell Street Jewish ghetto of Chicago, and that's where he lived. You even if you're not from Chicago, you may be familiar with that area from the Blues Brothers movie, where John Lee Hooker is playing music and what had then become a black ghetto. But that was kind of the last gasp of that neighborhood. Then it then was torn down, I think, for Northwestern University, one of the colleges in Chicago. But that's where Jack Ruby was brought up, kind of like the Lower East Side of New York, or I know what do they call the Dallas area? That was sort of like that? Okay, thank you. And the same neighborhood that Jack Ruby grew up in, like many, like the Lower East Side, like that neighborhood whose name I didn't catch when everybody yelled it, but Benny Goodman. So the neighborhood produced Benny Goodman, Ruby's best friend from childhood, boxer Barney Ross, from when boxing was a Jewish sport. Ross was the welterweight champion multiple times, and then also from that neighborhood, the Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg, who also then became the UN ambassador. Also that neighborhood, Jake Guzik, who was a infamous mobster that there is in his older age, who was a little more scary, younger, but always wore the straw hat. And Al Capone, for whom Ruby and Ross did errands, allegedly just carrying empty envelopes so that they would have something to do and he'd give them $1. Okay. But that's what the world that Jack Ruby came up from. This is a sort of skip through his life. So he had very odd jobs. Spent a lot of time, especially as the World War II approached. He and Ross and other young Jewish men would invade and bust up Nazi Bund meetings in Chicago, because Jack did violence very well and very frequently. Always getting in fights, especially if somebody said anything remotely anti-Semitic, he would, his brothers tell stories of him coming home from a date or something with his suit covered in blood from having gotten into a fight. I guess you should have seen the other guy, but he was a very violent guy who was known to kind of go into violent fugue states. But here he is in a more peaceful moment. I don't know who he's on a date with. They seem to be fond of each other. There were rumors he was gay, that he wasn't gay, that he was bisexual, that there were, every kind of rumor there could be. He was very conscious that people thought he was gay. He had a little bit of a lisp almost, and he was very concerned, especially being in the strip club business, that people would not think he was all man, He had kind of a Nathan Detroit, you'll see her picture in a little while, he had a kind of a Nathan Detroit long-term, maybe not engagement, but he had a girlfriend for 10 years named Alice Nichols. I don't know anybody, that name ring a bell to me? He even once, I think Rabbi Silverman would not consider an interfaith marriage, so he went to Rabbi Klein with her. Oh, I want to know where Rabbi Klein, because that led. I don't know why. He went to Rabbi Klein with her and inquired about her converting, even though she had no interest in converting, and he gave them a book of conversion rules and advice, and they never went back. But here he is on a date of some kind. There he is with a canoe. These are photos I think from his family, basically. Although, of course, ownership of photos, as I've learned, and that was part of how I got connected with Jessica, was finding photos. A lot of photos you think are in public domain, they're not in the public domain. Ruby with one of his sisters, I think that's his sister one of them, sister and a friend somewhere, he was capable of not being violent, apparently. There he is with his sister Eve, with whom, did any of you know Eva Grant? Yeah.
Right, I remember you.
Really? Okay, I want to hear about that. But they had a very tempestuous, crazy relationship. Their parents were, his mother was in and out of mental institutions in Chicago. And his father was a very kind of violent, funny guy. I think he was supposed to have a great sense of humor, especially with double entendre jokes. But the family they were kind of nuts, and Jack being the craziest, but his sister Eva was not far behind. And they had, I guess in effect, Jack was either, the closest thing to a marriage was either his sister or his dogs, which is another story. This is just an interesting thing that's come out recently. There's some footage of a parade, I think around Thanksgiving, maybe in 1960, where a lot of Ruby's entertainers, including a woman named Jewel Brown, who also is best known as working with Louis Armstrong. So there's that parade, I think a Thanksgiving parade in 60. So Jack was part, as you know, was part of the whole fabric. He made it his business to be everywhere, to know everybody, to give out business cards with risque drawings on them, and invite police and politicians and entertainers and anybody who would listen to his club. So that's Jack in the crowd at that parade, which I think was for raising money for the March of Dimes, something. But it was a Thanksgiving Day type parade. And there he is with his dogs and a cat. The cat is new to me. I don't know what the cat is doing, but Ruby had, some people thought it was kind of a inappropriately intimate relationship with his dogs. He loved the dogs to the extent that he really mostly lived in his car, but so did the dogs, and the dogs would chew the upholstery till it was just springs, and they would crap in the car at will. And it was really, people really saw that as just this, which it was, a bizarre behavior, because he had an apartment, but he had a roommate because he needed the money, because he was in very dire financial straits. He owed the IRS $40,000. He owed, who knows what he owed, the mob or anybody else, but just constantly in debt and constantly hustling for money. And that's Alice Nichols. That's her at Ruby's trial. If anybody recognizes her, but she was a widow, and she and Jack Ruby were an item. Although they didn't speak for years, but she was one of the first people that he called when Kennedy was assassinated. He made a lot of, if you're here, you probably know a lot of the various stories about the many phone calls he made and why he made them and who he made them to. And, were they in part of some kind of plan or plot or just a desperate guy trying to survive? I'm here now showing you your time, because why not? But this is part of my impressions of the milieu that Jack lived in. This was the subculture of downtown Dallas, and Jewish Dallas in particular, so that's Honest Joe Goldstein's loans, but that, somehow, that's just a store that a lot of people that I've talked to or read about just mention Honest Joe's as being, it looks looks like anybody been to Honest Joe's? How was it? Yeah. What was it like? Was it fun? And then this is Abe's Colony Club, and I have Abe's. Well, get ready. You're gonna cry. So this is Ruby's competitors. Ruby had not intended to go into the strip club business. He had country western clubs. The Carousel Club itself was supposed to be kind of an elegant nightclub, but he couldn't make that work. And the Weinstein brothers, Abe and Barney, who owned, they were brothers and they had clubs around the corner from each other, but they were not in partners in that, they didn't co-own the clubs. Each one owned a different club. This was Abe's Colony Club. That's a postcard from the interior, which I think is more elegant than Ruby's, but kind of in a similar 1950s redecorated style. And that is Abe Weinstein. That's the photo that I got from Jessica. A much higher quality than any of those pirated images online, so thank you. And that's, for some reason, Abe has a picture of Zazie Pitts on the wall. I don't know how glamorous she was considered, but and Abe, I've seen interviews with him, and I spoke to one of his sons for the book, and he was not crazy. He was in business, and did not trust Ruby at all, justifiably. Jack would often report on them to the Actors Union, occasionally to the FBI. It's funny because people, was Jack Ruby an FBI informant? Well, he was, but the only record we have is that he informed on his competitors about various violations. So that is Stanley Marcus of the Neiman Marcus department stores, who also was weirdly, 2 degrees of separation removed from Jack Ruby. My impression, and feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, the Jewish community was very insular in ways, and everybody knew everybody. And Marcus was the guy who then, he was the center of a lot of controversy and political strife in the days leading up to the assassination. And he was the one who said, he was one person who testified that he did not think Ruby could get a fair trial in Dallas. That is Hillel Silverman. That's a picture I took at Shearith, Israel. And I don't know if I technically have the right to show it, but it was on the wall. I was there. I took a picture of it. So don't tell anybody. That's him in his prime. He had a very storied career, very interesting career, both fighting in Israel during the War of Independence and serving as a chaplain in Korea. And he was sort of on this career path where Dallas was his next logical stop. His father was a famous rabbi as well. If you look at if you have a conservative prayer book, Haggadah, they say edited by Morris Silverman. That was his father. And of course his son is Jonathan Silverman, the actor best known for Weekend at Bernie's. That was one of the things, I just come across all these names of people and go, how did these people fall into the Jack Ruby story? This was a guy, does anybody know this person? No. He's a doctor. He was Ruby's dermatologist, treated him for a variety of STDs. Coleman Jacobson, yes. It's Coleman Jacobson. Anybody know him or know his name? He seemed to, he and Ruby, I wouldn't say they were buddies, but they seemed to kind of, when Ruby wanted to know, especially when Kennedy was assassinated, and Ruby wanted to know what was the synagogue going to do, he called Jacobson to get the lowdown. So this sort of, Ruby knew people high and low. This is one of the weirdest what-ifs in history ever. That's Jack Ruby with that Tada pose on the left. On the right is a 12-year-old kid who went by the stage name of Little Daddy Nelson, as opposed to Big Daddy. He was a very talented singer and dancer, and Jack was managing him. And he thought that this kid would be his ticket out of poverty and out of the strip club business and into respectable entertainment. And there's pictures, there's other photos of him with the kid that the kid is kissing him. I mean, it's just a very touching. But then, as Little Daddy started having success, it turned out somebody else. Ruby had signed a contract with the kid's mother, but as soon as the kid started having success, somebody else showed up claiming to be the kid's mother. And I think, I'm not sure how far it went in terms of court battles, but Ruby kind of just walked away from the situation. But that's like a weird what if, right? What if Jack Ruby become known as the manager of Little Daddy Nelson and had fulfilled his show business dreams? That's the Irving Theater, where that's not the photo I took today, but Ruby had a lot of other businesses for brief periods, in the 50s especially, and I think right before he went into this prolonged depression and stayed in the hotel and nearly killed himself in about 52, 53. So he and his sister owned and managed the Irving Theater, which really sounds like the Irving Theater. And then this is the Bob Wills Roadhouse, which Jack Ruby took over for about a year and managed. Now it's called the Longhorn Ballroom, same place. And that is a display in the ballroom from when Jack would serve as MC, and he'd introduce himself as the Chicago Cowboy, and he'd come on in a white suit. And then, by some reports, 6 shooters too, which again is kind of weird. But so he had this great show business desire. He would go around and say to people, "I'm colorful, ain't I? I'm a character, ain't I?" He really was kind of living, probably like a lot of us, including me, do, like him, thinking he was in a movie. People who country singing, country western, people who worked and sang, performed in his clubs include Dub Dickerson, the boy. I love he's called the boy with the grin in his voice, because his grin had a big impact on Jack Ruby. They got into a fight one day. I think Dickerson wouldn't move his chair, and Ruby kicked the chair, and suddenly they're having a brawl in the club. And Ruby is fighting dirty, of course, and kicking him in the crotch with his knee. And Dickerson and Ruby's finger ends up in Dickerson's mouth, and Dickerson bites off the top third of Ruby's finger. So Ruby only had 9 fingerprints, and that's one of the reasons I think that he held the gun in sort of there's a theory he held the gun in a certain way that people associate with how a professional hitman would hold a gun. Maybe that's true, but part of it was just he didn't have all his fingers working. So Dub Dickerson is the guy who chewed off Jack Ruby's top thing. Anybody recognize the guy on the left who's hanging out with Jack Ruby? Tennessee Ernie Ford, yes. Well, 16 tons and ready to get Jack Ruby. It's this very weird alternate. This is Hank Williams on the left. On the right, that's sort of a nod to my comic book roots. That's the guy who played. That's Tom. The guy who plays Loki. But he played Hank Williams in the movie. Jack Ruby was the last. Jack Ruby was maybe the last person to give Hank Williams regular work when Williams was kind of spinning out of control. They had a love-hate relationship. Williams would hide from Ruby because he didn't want to be bothered, but he needed him for the work. And then there's a story that at least once, when Williams blacked out backstage, Ruby, needing to recoup his investment, would charge customers for taking pictures of blacked out Hank Williams, because he was that kind of guy. The band, Robbie Robertson writes in his memoir, and they've talked about it in documentaries, about a few months before the assassinations, Ruby was managing, I'm not sure if he owned or just managing the club that's called either the Skyliner Club, the Skyline something on that famous, infamous road. Somebody help me with the name of the road? Wow, okay.
Blue 12?
Huh?
Blue 12?
No, not a number, it was a name. No, okay, it'll come to me. It doesn't, you know, it's in the book. They played for him in this very bizarre, of course, in a club that had had a fire, so had no roof. So he recommended that they not leave their instruments there, so they slept overnight in the club. And, you know, then the punchline is that months later they realized this crazy guy, Jack, was Jack Ruby. But the main club he's known for, and probably the one that he spent the most time at, was the Carousel Club. And those are just Jack with a couple of his dancers in front of the club. There was a guy named Wally Weston. Anybody familiar with the comedic styles of Wally Weston? You know, Jack had, yeah, it was burlesque. It's not what we think of as stripping now. It was like the last gasp of burlesque more than kind of the over-the-top kind of stripping that you see in clubs now. And had comedians and musicians. Gabe Kaplan, Mr. Cotter, had the story about how he auditioned for, he was like 18, you know, he just started his comedy career, and he auditioned for Ruby, and he used a very mild obscenity that he'd heard other comedians use all the time in clubs. Starts with a T, and Ruby went ballistic. He said, what do you think, this is a toilet? You're trying to get me closed down? This isn't a toilet. Take your filthy mouth somewhere. Went nuts on him. And it was, and then later, the routine involved Dracula, don't ask. But then later on, Ruby calmed down and bought a Dracula mask for Gabe Kaplan, so he could use it in his own. Wait, I'm trying to go.
You're going too fast.
I'm trying to move backwards. How do I go? There's Gabe. Okay. So yeah, so he has a lot of people have these weird Jack Ruby stories, but really Jack wanted to be his own MC, and he kind of wanted to be a stand-up comedian. He wanted to be in showbiz, and he wanted people to know him, and they did. But there he is MCing. There's a team. I figured I would go G rated or PG-13 for this talk, but that's one of the dancers in his club. That's Ruby with a bunch of his dancers, and I think, anybody know who the guy with the mustache is? He's either a comedian or a musician, but it's kind of a nice workplace photo. Right? It's like a fun place to work. Jack was like but Jack would hire and fire people all the time. He'd get into these horrible arguments, sometimes fist fights, but at least shouting and screaming. And then people would come back to work like nothing happened, and they would, I think you had to have a certain kind of tolerance for that behavior to keep going back. But you heard stories about great generosity, that he literally would give blood if somebody was injured, one of his staff members were hurt. It's a very, this is Tammy True, and so this is a poster from her performing at the Skyliner Ballroom. I'm not sure if it's when Jack was managing it or not. But she figures a lot in, she was somebody who could tolerate Jack and could quit and get fired and come back. And later on, some of you may know, she ended up, you can see a photo later, performing in her 70s into her 80s with a review called The Conspiracy Club. It's called the Ruby Review featuring The Conspiracy Club. But this is her in her prime. Candy Barr, oddly enough, she was maybe the most famous stripper of that era. And she had a very difficult life. She was kind of basically kidnapped into starring in what's considered the first porn movie. And she performed it. She was friends with Ruby, but would not perform at his clubs. I guess she thought the clubs was a dumb. But she did perform for Abe Weinstein's club. But really, if some of my research indicates that neither of those people treated her particularly well. But there was, the stuff you don't want to think about. Oh, it's just stripping and there's nothing more nefarious. There was more nefarious going on, and both, you know, I don't know how deeply Abe was involved, but I think Jack was more involved. I used to want to, when I first started this one, it was a graphic novel, I wanted to think of Jack Ruby as kind of Ralph Cramden. I wanted to think of him as a slightly more violent Jackie Gleason in The Honeymooners. I was quite wrong about that. Although he was good. So this was Candy Barr. That was not her real name. And here she is with her boyfriend, Mickey Cohen, the famous gangster. They had a tempestuous relationship. I think she ratted him out to the IRS. He thought about having her killed, and he changed his mind. It was a lovely relationship. But she did movies. She was very famous, and Ruby, when she had a famous pot bust in the 50s, and that got her in a lot of trouble. And then her lawyer was Melvin Belli, and the judge was Judge Brown, which made them start out Ruby's own trial on bad terms. But when she had lost her license to perform, Jack brought her a couple of dachshund puppies for her to start a dog breeding business. And she was very touched by it, but I love her quote, the business did not succeed because she said about the dogs, they just didn't like each other that way. But again, that is like the odd Jack Ruby, driving hundreds of miles, you know, to see somebody who he basically pimped out to help her out, you know, with dogs that could have sex with each other, or not. So this is Santo Trafficante, a mob boss who was imprisoned in Cuba during the revolution. He was imprisoned in Cuba. You know, and there were stories of Ruby traveling and running guns for both sides in the Cuban Revolution. And this guy Trafficante was a big mob boss, and Ruby allegedly took a trip to Cuba for a quote-unquote vacation, but probably was bringing information and or money to Trafficante. So he is sort of one of the more overt mob guys in Ruby's orbit. There's the Egyptian. I had dinner there the other night with Brian Chuck, who I think I saw in the audience, and I'd been there in 2008, and again this week, and it's you know, it's Campese's Egyptian, and they kind of play it fast and loose. These guys, they seem to have been actual mobsters, but at this point it's like a mob-themed restaurant, including they have their little Jack Ruby niche in the restaurant. They have like a bunch of athletes and performers and entertainers, and there's Jack's mugshot. They very proudly, now here's this quote from Corky. This was Corky, one of the children, one of the Campese children, about why Jack killed Oswald. That's one theory, one of the 100 different stories Jack told about why he did it. And here's more of the museum aspect. Every book that they're mentioned is mobsters and being a mob hangout. It's more public relations for them. This is my favorite thing in the restaurant. It's a photo from Al Pacino, autograph of Al Pacino to Joe Campese, from one godfather to another. And you can, I just took that picture 2 days ago. Back to the more serious stuff. This is, of course, the Kennedys in the motorcade shortly after Jack said to his wife as they were descending, they were heading into nut country now. Because he came to Dallas to make peace among the Democrats who were feuding, and he needed to be reelected the following year. That's one frame from the Zapruder film. There's a book by Zapruder's granddaughter called 26 Seconds, I think. It's very interesting. But, you know, the way that what Ruby did affected his family, those 26 seconds of film really had a major impact on the Zapruder family. You know, Zapruder probably, maybe some of you knew him or knew his family, but he was he had that garment factory in Dealey Plaza. That's why he was at the motorcade to test out his new movie camera. This is maybe one of the most controversial things. That's Arlen Specter on the left, showing how I don't think he called it the single bullet, later known as sarcastically as the magic bullet, how it would have worked. Specter plays a really bizarre or interesting part in Ruby's story. After he was convicted, Ruby's lawyers allowed him to testify for the Warren Commission. And Ruby is sitting there, and he says, "I won't talk unless there's another Jew in the room." And he refuses. So Specter, the room was very crowded. Specter was watching like the World Series or something like that, and somebody runs and gets him. He says to him, because he didn't know Specter was Jewish, and they said, "Ruby won't talk without another Jew in the room." Specter comes in, and he walks in, and Ruby says to him, "Are you a Yid?" And Specter, I guess his lawyerly part kicked in. He would not answer. He kind of nodded, but would not. So for some reason, he didn't want it on there, but whatever it was, satisfied Ruby. And then Ruby talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And if you read his Warren Commission testimony, it's kind of Shakespearean gibberish. A lot of people, have read different things into it. He said this, he meant that, and I don't know. But it to me, it's really just kind of a word salad that's kind of beautiful and crazy, but not even ambiguous, just weird, like Jack. Well, this is the second most famous picture. In both these photos, of course, here's a guy who wanted to be famous and wanted to be famous, wanted to impact history. In both these photos, in that one and this one, you don't see his face. I mean, so the most famous thing he ever did, you don't see who he is. That did not get the Pulitzer, although it's a great photo. That did, because it's the moment of him firing the gun. Minutes later, he's arrested and in handcuffs and fingerprinted. And although he looks grim in this, that day he, by all reports, he was kind of chipper. He kind of was proud of what he did. If somebody was pressuring him or hiring him to do it, then at least that pressure was off. When he got arrested, a lot of the things, all his problems, right? He didn't have to worry about his club anymore. He didn't have to worry about making money. He didn't have to worry about all sorts of stuff. His siblings did. That fell onto his brothers and sisters because, of course, they had this experience of, oh, there's my brother Jack killing Lee Harvey Oswald. What the hell do we do now? How are we going to bail him? How are we literally going to bail him out of this? So that's sort of the approach I took in the book. Who was this guy? Who were the people who loved him, hated him? How did his mind work? And what are the possible reasons he did what he did? This is Silverman visiting him in prison, where Ruby would claim that he could hear that he'd started the second Holocaust, and they could hear the screams of Jewish children as they were being boiled in oil in the basement. Was he really hearing that? Was he that crazy? Or was he the world's greatest actor? But this was a consistent thing. And then he would suddenly flip and be like, who wants to play cards? These are the players. These are for the state. Henry Wade on the upper left, you may know better from Roe v. Wade, same guy. These are the different people, psychiatrists, experts, lawmen. And this is Ruby's main lawyer, Melvin Belli, in the upper right. There's Barney Ross, who kind of had a very hard life and a lot of morphine addiction. They made a movie about it called Body and Soul with John Garfield. Have you ever seen that movie? It was not literally about Ross, but it was close enough that Ross sued the producers and won. So if you want to know about Barney Ross's life, maybe see that movie. But Ross testified as a character witness for Jack Ruby. And yet, so Ruby, who moments would be crawling under his desk and talking about having started the second Holocaust and acting totally helpless and childlike, would hold these impromptu press conferences during the recesses. So unlike Oswald, who we don't know what he would have said, you could not shut Jack Ruby up for 3 years. He talked and talked and talked and talked. Here he was, the center of attention, like he always wanted. Whatever the reason, he's looking very serious businessman. There's Ross, the courtroom sketch of Ross's testimony. I don't think he had the boxing gloves with him when he testified. This is one of the weirdest things. The trial was a circus trial, not unlike the Chicago 7 trial. So that kind of attention, everybody in the room writing a book or taking notes for a book. There was a jailbreak, a bunch of prisoners on the top floor of the courthouse. They said, if we carry a jailbreak with all these reporters and camera people here, they wouldn't dare shoot us. And they were right, so they carved a gun out of soap and a pen and shoe polish, and they took some hostages, and sure enough, they made a break. But they didn't have a plan beyond getting out. It was like, oh, we're out. What do we do now? So they quickly were captured, and this is one of the ringleader, the head guy. And then the newspapers were not kind. The Daily News in New York was not kind. I apologize on the news's behalf. And then the verdict came in, which was, despite Belli's attempts to have a very esoteric defense, which later ended up being justified, the verdict came in very quickly as guilty. That's not Eve, but maybe his sister Marion, and that might be, is that Sam? Does anybody know? Is that Sam Ruby? It's either Earl or Sam, or maybe the third brother. Anyway, so Ruby is convicted, spends 3 years in jail. Silverman left town around that time. He said he was burned out and just couldn't deal with having been Ruby's rabbi for that time. I think Silverman was trying to do public relations for the Jews as well. I think he was really concerned that, sort of in a milder version of what Jack was worried about, that what he did would unleash a torrent of anti-Semitism. But he finally left. Ultimately, a group of lawyers led by William Kunstler got the verdict overturned, really a lot because they used a lot of the same arguments that Belli had used. But Belli had antagonized the judge and the prosecutor. And then, of course, the Warren Commission report comes out, and it's highly flawed, but it's full of information. It's 888 pages and 26 volumes of evidence, plus there's the hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper. So this is the maddening thing about the Kennedy assassination. It's not that there's not enough information. There is so much information, you drown in it. This is a weird picture. That's Gerald Ford, who was on the commission, who reported in Spector's memoir. He and Ford report that Ruby took over the questioning of the Warren. That not only did he insist that Spector that there be another Jew in the room, but he kind of was ordering the Warren Commission staff around like they were busboys at the carousel. Because you think Ruby had many faces of Jack Ruby. That's the title of the book, because he displayed all. So this is a picture of Ford there, and that's the D'Estaing when he was president of France. But on the right is New York Yankee superstar Mickey Mantle, who lived next door. Not only lived next door to Sheriff Israel and was friendly with Silverman, but he was a partner in a club owned by a gangster named Benny Bickers. That name ring a bell with anybody? There's another local club. So again, these weird circles of Jack Ruby. The minute the assassination happened, certainly the minute the Warren Commission came out, there were people who did not believe it and were trying to debunk it and discredit it. Mark Lane was the first, maybe one of the most famous. People like Gerald Posner took the opposite view. Case closed. They make a case for the Warren Commission being correct. Again, JFK is a movie that, as you know, did not put any credence in the commission, in the report, and Had Brian Doyle Murray playing Ruby, who did a pretty good job. I'd like to have the slide of the Ruby movie, but there's enough slides. The Umbrella Academy is a comic book-based show that had this guy, whose name I never remember, but he played Ruby very well, I thought, up to and including the Dachshunds. So I'm going to wind down with just this part of it. That is the guy with the beard is a reporter named Steve North. He worked for the Raldo Show, he worked for a lot of newspapers. He's the one who wrote the obit for Rabbi Silverman that appeared in the Jewish Telegraphic Agency and a lot of other papers. He was very helpful. He somehow, through the various wending through life, became friendly with Ruby's siblings and with Rabbi Silverman and his family. So he was this strange link between the two, and he was of great help with the book. So that's Eva. This is 1989 in an unnamed deli in Los Angeles. That's Eva on the left, Steve North with the beard. Earl is sitting on the right, and that is, I think is that Sam, the one in the checkered shirt? I think, pretty sure it's Sam Ruby. That is Tammy True, more recent. She died a couple of years ago, but she was performing with and she wrote a book and was performing with the Conspiracy Club. Weirdly enough, there was a lot of controversy and lawsuits over who owned Jack's gun, owned everything Jack's, but especially the gun. Finally went to a guy, I forget his name, but paid a couple of $100,000 for it. And I think eventually the family got it back. So I'm not sure if it was the family or this other guy. Who's the other guy? Actually, I think the family doesn't know. Anyway.
Anthony Puglisi.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And Puglisi still has it?
Yes.
Okay,
Sure
so
does.
Puglisi then
He's the one who
shot,
did that, I think.
they shot 5,000 bullets from Jack's gun so they could sell collectibles. An original cartridge shot for the most famous gun in the world, the Jack Ruby Colt Cobra 38 Special Limited Edition Collectible. That is Jack's tombstone, which the most remarkable thing about it is the birth date does not correspond with any other birth date he ever gave in any other part of his life. And that's the presentation, so thank you.
So come back up here and join me. You made my job very, very easy tonight.
I'll see what I can do to make it harder.
I want to ask you about that esoteric defense that you referenced in the PowerPoint. So defense attorney Melvin Belli, his defense for Ruby was that Ruby suffered from a rare type of epilepsy, psychomotor epilepsy, and he went into a fugue state and was not aware of his actions and acted like an automaton when he shot Oswald. Do you think that is a justifiable defense?
I think it exists. I don't know if Jack Ruby had it when he shot Oswald. There's plenty of history of Jack beating somebody up, literally slamming their head into the pavement and suddenly going, "Oh, what am I doing? How did we get here? Who are you?" And then here's $100 and here's a pizza. And that would, so I think it's possible he suffered from it, but it's impossible to determine whether he had it at that moment. But it did it added this weird aspect to the trial where an epilepsy advocacy organization came and started picketing and handing out leaflets because they felt that they were, not that long ago that epilepsy was thought of as like demonic possession. So they were fighting a public relations battle, and they went ballistic and hated that Belli used that defense.
Ruby was well known to associate with a lot of Dallas police officers. Many of them on the force would go to the carousel, and they knew Ruby. Ruby brought sandwiches to the police station, I think, the night of the Kennedy assassination. What does that tell you about Ruby, that he always wanted to kind of be close to law enforcement?
Well, needless to say, there's a school of thought that Ruby was bringing, as I put it in the book, something more potent than pastrami to the police, that it was a cover for drug smuggling and other illicit activities. But there was an aspect to it where he wanted to be liked and trusted he was in a business that was sleazy, and certainly his approach to it was, and his club was sleazy. I think that was part of the appeal. College kids would come and sort of exciting and daring, and the last vestiges of vaudeville, and maybe the beginning of modern stripping culture. But he needed, his ego needed to be liked, but his business needed to be liked. Up to including, the 48 hours between the two murders. If Ruby, right, the school thought Ruby was hired or forced or coerced, that it was not spontaneous, that he was working on somebody's behalf. And yet here's a guy who did everything possible to call attention to himself for 48 consecutive hours. His actions are so illogical, going out. He acted like a guy who was out to prove, he acted like he was a detective out to solve the mystery of who had killed Kennedy. Because he seemed convinced it was the John Birch Society and that General Walker. And so he went out and took photos of an impeach Earl Warren sign, which is weird because it's literally, it was a billboard. Anybody could see it, but Jack had his staff photographer take a picture of it, and then they went to the post office. There was an ad, an anti-Kennedy ad published that was signed by Bernard Weissman, and Ruby was convinced it was somebody putting a fake Jewish-sounding name in to make Jews look bad. And so there was a post office box mentioned in the ad where you could send contributions or inquiries, and Ruby tries to break into the post office in the middle of the night to see what's in the post office. Just anything possible, just being as conspicuous as a person could be, which is not the image of a stealthy hitman, but might be the image of somebody who's being coerced into doing something he doesn't really want to do and wants to get caught. There are many different points of view on that, but behavior was crazy for 48 hours, but also including trying to get into the room where Oswald was being questioned. Did he have his gun with him, didn't he? He said, like everything else he testified about, he said both those things. He made a lot of contradictory claims. The thing about him and Oswald is that they both had a history of mental illness. They were both nuts. Whether they were lone nuts or not is the big question, and I try to lay out possibilities, but I'm certainly, I'm not presumptuous enough to think I'm going to solve it.
So Ruby is convicted of murder with malice. Let's just assume for a minute he didn't suffer from psychomotor epilepsy. He was aware of his actions, and it was a premeditated crime. He knew ahead of time that he was going to kill Lee Harvey Oswald for reasons that are his own. Why do you think he did it in that way? Do you think that there's a possibility that Ruby thought he would be killed himself and go out as a hero, or do you think he thought his buddies, the cops, would let him get away with it? What are your thoughts, having researched him so much?
Well, I'd say if you asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have said the first. I would have said, here was a guy whose life was on the skids, who owed money to, the IRS, probably to the mob, probably certainly to his brother, who was very generous, just owed everybody, was living with a roommate, which aside from the rumors that he and this guy, George Senator, were lovers, which Ruby did not seem that thrilled to have that rumor out, just as not an indication that he couldn't pay his own rent, and so needed to take in a roommate. So his life was in a bad spot. Whatever relationship he had with that Alice Nichols was long gone, although she was the first person that he called after the assassination. So again, if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have said he wanted to be the Jew that killed the guy that killed the president. He wanted to be the hero and the heroic Jew that saved the day and killed this guy that needed killing, and then go out in a blaze of glory. Because how could, especially if you've seen Godfather 2, how could you not be killed if you step up and kill Oswald? But he, for numerous reasons, the room was full of reporters and police, and I think the police, maybe you guys would know better than me, I think the police were just literally gun shy. But yeah, I think he thought he would commit what's called suicide by cop. That's what I used, that was my ironclad, that's gotta be what it was. But the more I research, the less I know. I'm embarrassed to admit, but that's because, you go into writing about the Kennedy assassination, you go into writing anything, you have to have some irrational belief that somebody somewhere is going to want to read it. And in the thing like the Kennedy assassination, no matter how hard you try, you go, I'm going to figure it out. All these other people, they could, I'm going to, and then at a certain point you go, no, I'm not. And so, there's a theory that I find reasonable and possible, although even then, I don't know how to trace it back further, is that the Dallas police, and maybe some of you were or knew or related to police, were more angry about Officer Tippit being killed, really, than about Kennedy being killed. And so because Ruby wanted to curry favor with them, he became their instrument of revenge. That seems like a fairly reasonable, I mean, this doesn't make the cops look that good, but it's a human response, and you could see how Jack Ruby, well, it was interesting, Jack Ruby, maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, he was never even accused of murdering anybody. There was one time in Chicago when for like 5 minutes he was questioned. He was in the room, his middle name is Leon because he named himself after a Union officer named Leon Cook in Chicago, who he said he admired. Cook was murdered by another corrupt officer of the Union who shot Cook in the back and then pleaded self-defense and won. But Ruby named himself, that middle name. That's the only time I know of when he was even questioned, although he could seem to be in the vicinity when a lot of people got killed. But so he was not, whatever criminality he was involved in, and certainly lots of violence, but he was not known as a professional killer.
What would you say is the most surprising thing that you've learned about Ruby?
Just how much a part of the Jewish community he was, and he wasn't a guy who just happened to be Jewish. He was, and obviously I'm sort of thinking this way because of the milieu that we're in here, but just how much he was part of that community, and how much he was part of the show business community. We have this very black and white, literal and figurative view of Jack Ruby. He exists almost as an action figure. He's in the action figure in the Kennedy assassination setup, in the Kennedy assassination diorama. But he wasn't. He was an actual person with actual history and family and friends and and he was crazy and he was violent and he was mean and nasty. But that he had. I mean, it was almost, if he hadn't killed, if he had had a success with Little Daddy Nelson, we might be talking about Jack Ruby. Oh, did you see Jack Ruby on the Merv Griffin show? He was hilarious. I don't think there were that many steps from that for him.
And of course, he
We
was a
need to
singing.
move to audience questions. I'm
Yes,
so
we
sorry
will.
to interrupt.
He was also a singing waiter and sold exercise twist boards and things like that. He could have had all kinds of success
He
beyond
sold
shooting
pizza
the
ovens, anything to make a living.
So I want to be able to take some audience questions for the next few minutes. If you have questions, I think we have a mic at the back. We'll bring it to you.
Just raise your hands. I saw Les first.
And be kind. If I got it really wrong, please.
From the time that Ruby kills Oswald to the time that Melvin Belli becomes his attorney, in between that, was Melvin Belli the first and only attorney that Jack Ruby approached to defend him?
Well, when you say Jack Ruby, we're really talking about the Ruby family. The Ruby family sees their brother kill Oswald on TV. And their reaction is different than most other people's because he's their brother. And basically, I mean, I don't know literally, actually I do, in the book they actually have some quotes from their children, but you know, just imagine, oh my God, Jack, what have you done now? You know, and so their first thought is how do they get their brother not to die in the electric chair? So they went through, they were local lawyers, among the people Jack networked with were a lot of local attorneys, Tom Howard and half a dozen other people. They went through many, many lawyers. This caused lots of feuding. The Ruby family went through lawyers in those 3 years, like hot and cold running water. They were just, so Belli came in. Belli at that point was pretty much the most famous lawyer in America. Unfortunately, he had that bad relationship with the candy bar case with Judge Brown, which did not help him. But I think one of the reasons that he went for that esoteric psychomotor epilepsy was because Wade vowed to, you know, Wade, I think, had succeeded in maybe one person that he tried to get executed was not executed. So it was either 24 out of 25 or 25. Wade never failed in getting a capital punishment. So I think Belli just figured, let's try this, let's see what happens. But yes, they went both before and after and during Belli. They went through tons and tons of, you know, kind of the way they got Belli. And again, for this, I'm going Jewish for this audience for obvious reasons. Ruby's brother Earl, who owned a dry cleaning establishment in Detroit, was a fellow Hebrew school parent with somebody who knew a guy named Shore. I forget his first name, but he was a probably mobbed up guy who worked for Frank Sinatra at Reprise Records. Frank Sinatra's all over this story too in weird ways. So Earl goes out, and so Shore, Mike Shore, his name was Mike Shore. I think he had some very Jewish name, but Mike Shore was how he was known. And Shore says, you got to get Melvin Belli, he's the best. So Shore is the one, but it was through the Hebrew school connection that Belli ended up in the story.
Questions over here?
I'm loud enough, Jess Johnson then. Okay, if you want to be loud, go for it. Okay. In your book or in your research, did you interview anybody that was in the apparel business here in Dallas? Because I'm proud to say my father is one of the founders of the Apparel Mart here, and those guys, those businessmen, all knew Jack Ruby. They all hung out at the Carousel Club.
Really?
And yeah, Rhonda's saying the same, because we had showrooms near each other. So that's another whole set of things. And I don't know if you touched on that or not. He used to bring them liquor and snacks and all kinds of bribes. Nothing illegal, well,
God forbid.
but no, but he used to play cards with them all the time in the back rooms of some of these showrooms. And I don't know if you.
And did they like him? Did they find him an appealing character?
Yes, they did.
Uh-huh.
They were, I won't say they were good friends with him. They would never consider him one of their best friends, but they were definitely buddies with him.
The closest I came was speaking to Abraham Zapruder's granddaughter, who I really just spoke to as background. She didn't, I didn't interview her specifically. She's not really quoted in the book, but she was very, she and through her parents and her aunts and uncles, sort of gave me background information that was important. But I wish I knew you when I was writing the book.
Yes, do you know when Jack Ruby moved to Dallas and why?
Like everything with Jack Ruby, that's a loaded question, but 1947, which was the same year he and his brothers changed their name from Rubenstein to Ruby, the official story is that his sister was running a club in Dallas and having a lot of trouble, and Jack came on behalf of the family to rescue her. There are other stories that indicate that he was part of the Chicago mob's infiltration into Dallas. Both things could be true, but the official thing is to help his sister out and really pay her off and send her out of town.
The reason I asked about it because I heard rumors that there were a group of people in the Jewish community here in Dallas that were smuggling weapons to Israel
Oh, that's interesting.
shipping over there and buying surplus military gear and sending it to Israel as agricultural machinery. And I remember that Jack Ruby was involved in that effort as well.
It certainly is possible. I'd never had to see him. Is there anything you ever heard?
No, I've not heard that particular.
Yeah, but I'd heard about the gun running and tank run and jeep running to and from Cuba for both sides. But it certainly would not surprise me. But it's not something I've come across. And if this guy doesn't know it, nobody knows it. So.
We have time for one more question. I saw him.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Two conflicting news stories.
Okay.
Both came over the wire. The first one was about 10 years after Ruby had been convicted and was in jail. And the story was, the man has regressed to an infantile state. He plays with his food and his fingers and looks at the wall all day. And that sort of story. That he had just completely degenerated, he was a madman. Just a news story. Before he died was the next news story. Jack Ruby faced the cameras and clearly stated, I played no part in any conspiracy. I was clear-headed, I was motivated, I did this. Thank you very much, and farewell, goodbye. Which story is true?
Well, it wasn't 10 years. He only did 3 years.
3, okay, so
But during those 3 years, he couldn't show them.
in those 3 years,
Yeah.
both, first
I think both-
no story and then the latter story. Which one? You
I
can't both
don't.
be true.
Well, they kind of both, because he did deteriorate. When he died. I mean, that's a thing where he had 3 different life-threatening conditions, and somehow nobody in the prison noticed. They gave him Pepto-Bismol. He was like vomiting regularly, losing weight, and then would hear, have some Pepto-Bismol, Jack. So obviously somebody wanted him to die for whatever reason, just to get him off their hands. Yes, he did regress. He would do those things, hiding under the table, claiming he started the second Holocaust, talking about dreams he had. But then he would snap into some other much more in control, both of himself and of the room. And when he it's funny, we were just talking about Lawrence Schiller, who was a guy who shows up in all over the place. But Schiller would go on to be Norman Mailer's research. Anyway, Schiller was in the room when Ruby shot Oswald. At one point, the family had spent all their money, which means mostly Earl, because he was the one who had, I think, the most money, spent all their money on Ruby's defense. And they were offered by, I think, Capitol Records some money to record Jack, and especially when he was dying, to get his last words. So his last words, much of which was in Yiddish, were, there was no conspiracy, I was not part of any group. So I think not only are they not mutually exclusive, but I think they kind of lead, if you read the book or just research it on your own, hope you read the book, you find that was consistent. They found, when he died, this is inconclusive again, maybe you know something about it. They found tumors in his brain. He had cancer that was widespread. They don't know when those tumors started, so whether they were active when he shot Oswald is unknown.
Yeah, it's inconclusive. Yeah,
Yeah.
We'll never know.
Yeah. So I think both things could be true. His family wanted to get something on the record, and they, with this guy Larry Schiller, they snuck, an old 1963 size tape recorder in an attaché case, and really they kind of prompted Jack to say something that it was no conspiracy, he did it on his own. So yeah, I just think both. Yeah, I think they fit together more than they seem to.
On that note, I will welcome Rhonda Duchin, our first vice president, up to just share a few quick remarks. Thank you so much for coming to Danny's lecture. There are book sales that will be at the table on the way out.
And I will sign them.
Yes, and Danny will be there to sign them. So thank you, everyone, so much, and thank you, Danny and Stephen.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, guys. And welcome to our Dallas Jewish Historical Society Trailblazers, our JCC Book Fest sponsors, and the Sixth Floor Museum Associate and Contributor members. We are so happy to learn from Mr. Fingeroth and Mr. Fagin tonight. These kind of engaging programs are made possible because of your community members like you, and we hope you'll mark your calendars for these upcoming programs. So real quick, on Thursday, November 30th at Temple Emmanuel in the Stern Chapel, Dallas Jewish Historical Society is thrilled to co-sponsor Howdy Hollywood with Temple Emmanuel Women of Reformed Judaism. Enjoy storytelling and singing by Dallas native Peggy Lauren Lohr, accompanied by her husband Bill, as they entertain us from Texas to Tinseltown. And backed by popular demand, we will be joined with renowned mosaic artist and painter Jamie Pink, who I know is here tonight. She can tell you more about it, but she will teach you about different media used to create mosaics and get those creative juices flowing. Join us on December 6th at the Biblical Arts Museum. It's $18 for Dallas Jewish Historical members and $30 for non-members. And coming up, lots of great programs. December 7th at the JCC right here, in partnership with the Dallas Jewish Funerals and the JCC Seniors Department, we will present an evocative panel discussion on the topic of cremation in Judaism. It's a free program, but registration is required. And last but not least, please make sure to join us on Sunday, January 21st from 10 to 12 at Congregation Beth Torah. We are partnering with the sisterhood there with a noted appraiser, Janice Lee, who will appraise 6 items selected by the program committee. Owners of the selected items will share their family memories and stories of acquisition. Tickets are only $10. It goes along kind of like the Antique Roadshow. So I hope you'll join us there as well. And want to wish everyone a very happy, healthy, safe Thanksgiving. And again, thank you to you guys, the JCC, and all of the sponsors and patrons for this event.